black CEO stepped into first class with a confirmed ticket, a pre-ordered gourmet meal, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows power well. But minutes later, he was denied service, silently surrounded by white passengers, raising glasses of champagne. No apology, no explanation, just a shrug, heavy with bias. What they didn't know was this man wasn't just a passenger. He was part of the airline itself, and this time, their disregard would come at a cost. A black CEO walks into the first-class cabin and is denied the meal. He pre-ordered, 6 white men around him sip champagne and nibble on caviar. What's going on here? Darius Coleman is no ordinary first-class passenger. He's the architect behind billion-dollar deals, a seasoned CEO, fluent in the world's boardrooms. His navy suit fits like it was tailored in Milan. His leather shoes shine. Everything about him signals success. But no one on that flight saw it. When he arrived at seat 1A, the flight attendant's demeanor was by the book until he asked for the meal he had pre-selected, lobster bisque and French-style tenderloin. Her reply stopped him cold. "Sorry, we've run out. You'll have to choose from the regular options." No real apology, no reasonable explanation, just a shrug and a cold glance. Darius didn't make a scene. He just sat down quiet, but already analyzing. 10 years of flying with Stratus Air, and never once had there been an issue with his orders, until today. And today he was the only black passenger in first class. That small act of disrespect wasn't random. It was intentional, and Darius knew it. Darius Coleman sat still, fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. His replacement meal, a cold sandwich and a glass of water. Across the aisle, 3 passengers were being served champagne with a cheerful, "Would you like a bit more caviar, sir?" He didn't look up, but he heard everything. This was no longer about food. It was a message, unspoken but loud. "You don't belong here." Darius was used to being underestimated. He'd walked into boardrooms where people assumed he was someone's assistant until he stood up and led the meeting. But on this flight, the insult wasn't crude. It was in the way he was dismissed. Another flight attendant passed by. No one asked if he needed anything. No one met his eyes again. They had finished serving their priority guests, and he clearly wasn't one of them. Never mind that he was the only passenger who had ever invested in the airline itself. There were 7 people in first class that day. 6 well-dressed white men, and Darius, the only man of color. The difference wasn't new to him, but today it was glaring. Too glaring to ignore. He remembered what the attendant had said earlier: "We have to prioritize certain guests." "Hope you understand." The words were soft, almost harmless, but Darius understood the real message. Those certain guests weren't chosen by miles, titles, or ticket class. They were chosen by bias, pure and simple. Darius could have been outraged, but he didn't need to be. He had power, and he knew how to use it. This quiet insult wouldn't be forgotten. Not because his pride was bruised, but because the system needed shaking. He opened his tablet. His eyes scanned a Geneva deal presentation, but his mind was elsewhere. A plan was forming, and this time, it wasn't for a business partner. It was for the very people serving him with quiet prejudice. The plane glided smoothly over a sea of clouds, its engines humming a familiar background tune. But inside Darius Coleman's mind, everything was moving on a different track. He set down his tablet, unlocked his phone, and opened an encrypted internal app reserved for urgent situations. A clean interface appeared. He typed a short command: "Initiate internal review protocol, Flight 917, extract crew IDs priority." The encrypted message was sent in under 3 seconds. On the other end, at Coleman Global's New York office, his assistant, Marcus Brandt, received the signal. He didn't ask questions, just one command, but it was enough. Something had happened. Darius wasn't angry. He didn't need to confront the flight attendant or ask for the flight manager. That was how powerless people reacted. He, on the other hand, owned equity in this airline. The attendant's disregard wasn't just personal, it was a symptom of a corporate culture left unchecked, and Darius knew to change a culture, you don't shout, you wield quiet, absolute power. He scanned the cabin again. The other passengers sipped wine, laughed and chatted like the world was built to serve them. No one noticed a silent investigation had been triggered, and none of them knew the quiet man in seat 1A had the power to dismantle the very service they were enjoying. In New York, Marcus was digging into crew records, reviewing customer complaints, internal notes, and ignored reports. One name stood out: 3 prior discrimination complaints, none addressed, not a mistake. A pattern, Marcus muttered, and he began compiling the file. Back on the flight, Darius took a sip of the only thing they'd offered him. Plain water, and gazed out the window. He didn't need to raise his voice, he just had to give the word, and the wheels were already in motion. At Coleman Global Headquarters, 10:42 p.m. New York time. Marcus Brandt was still at his desk. He had known something was wrong the moment the short message came through. Flight 917, crew ID check, urgent. Marcus asked no questions. With Darius Coleman, every action had purpose. He logged into Stratus Air's crew management system, a privilege granted because Darius was a major shareholder. The screen displayed the crew list for Flight 917, 3 flight attendants. One stood out: 3 prior customer complaints for discriminatory behavior, particularly toward Black and Asian passengers. All dismissed by HR with the familiar phrase, insufficient evidence. Marcus typed quickly, extract cabin camera footage, first class 21:13 to 21:47, include audio priority. Darius had personally approved the budget for the discrete cabin surveillance system, not to police staff, but to protect passengers and verify incidents. Today, that system would become the counterattack. On the plane, Darius remained still. The half-eaten sandwich sat untouched, not because he was hungry, but because his mind was focused elsewhere. Analyzing, remembering, connecting the dots. He recalled the flight attendant's cold eyes, the dismissive shrug, the line, "We have to prioritize certain guests. Hope you understand." No apology, no effort to make it right. In that cabin, some were offered a 3rd glass of wine. Others, like Darius, weren't asked a second time. 7,000 meters below, Marcus was scrubbing through footage, second by second. It was all there. The clipped flat tone of the attendant, the warm smiles for white passengers, the deliberate indifference toward Darius. A sarcastic comment from the crew caught on audio: what he thinks he owns, the airline. Marcus paused. He knew there was no joking in that tone, but the irony was brutal. They had just mocked their largest shareholder. Darius didn't react, he didn't need to. Everything had been recorded, and this time, no one could erase the evidence. No one on that crew knew that beyond that cabin door, their careers had just ended, and they wouldn't know why, not until the wheels touched down. The plane began its descent toward Geneva International Airport. Passengers buckled their seatbelts. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, tidying up. The soft clicks and clinks sounded like the closing bars of a familiar song. But for Darius Coleman, the real music was just beginning. His phone buzzed quietly in his jacket pocket. One message from Marcus. Video confirmed 3 violations, full audio excerpt sent to HR reception team waiting at the gate. Darius calmly folded his tablet. His expression didn't change except for a quiet glance toward the flight attendant passing by. She was still smiling at other passengers, but as she passed him, her eyes froze for a fraction of a second. Not because she knew, because she felt something was off. But it was too late. As the plane came to a full stop, passengers stood to collect their bags. Darius was the last to rise, moving slowly, straightening his collar, buttoning his jacket, every motion deliberate. The moment he stepped out of the cabin, 2 senior airline executives were waiting. No need for introductions, no explanations. One gave a respectful nod. "Mr. Coleman, this way, please." Darius followed them. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, behind the closed cabin door, the crew continued their post-flight routines, still chatting, still joking, believing the flight had ended without a hitch. Until 4 HR personnel in formal uniform stepped into the cabin, led by a stern man holding a file. His voice cut through the cabin. "All crew remain in position. This is a special internal review procedure. No one is to leave." The air froze. One attendant tried to respond, voice strained to sound calm. "Is there a mistake? This must be." But no one answered. In a temporary executive room near the VIP lounge, Darius replayed the footage again. The video was crystal clear, the audio undeniable. "Bet he thinks he owns the airline or something." A laugh, a smirk. The truth was raw. They hadn't just discriminated, they had mocked. He forwarded the video to the airline's CEO with a single subject line: "Our brand or theirs." The reply came 5 minutes later. Handled, you have full authority. Darius gave a single nod. That was all he needed. 20 minutes later, he walked into the room where the crew sat, confused, still unsure of what was happening. No need for introductions, no lengthy explanations. Darius looked directly at the one who had denied his meal, then scanned the rest of the crew. I was on today's flight, and you chose to act in direct opposition to the values this airline claims to represent. He paused. No one spoke. No one dared. I have evidence, I have authority, and I have made a decision. Silence fell like a blade. Effective immediately, the entire crew of Flight 917 is suspended from duty. Security will escort you off the premises. No anger, no raised voice. Just the cold precision of power, used at the right time. Darius said nothing more. He didn't have to, because from that moment on, no one in that room was confused about who really owned the skies. 2 days after the incident on Flight 917, Darius Coleman walked into the main boardroom at Stratus Air headquarters, the room where the company's highest stakes decisions were made. He didn't come alone. He brought data evidence and a comprehensive plan to reform the company's culture from the ground up. Around the long wooden table sat the board of directors, faces tense. No one asked why he had called the meeting on such short notice. They had all heard about the immediate dismissal of an entire first-class crew minutes after landing. Internal whispers travel faster than press. But today, Darius wasn't here to revisit the incident. He was here to talk about the system. What happened on Flight 917 was not an accident. It was the product of a culture that has allowed bias, favoritism, and apathy to operate unchecked for years. He flipped to the first slide. 3 years of internal stats. Complaints of discriminatory service had been steadily rising. The next slide showed excerpts from handwritten customer letters, guests who had been ignored, misnamed, denied service, or simply dismissed because they didn't look like regulars. This isn't about a few bad employees. This is about a failure in leadership, choosing to look away instead of confronting the problem. A board member cut in. Are you saying the entire system is broken? Darius met his eyes. I'm not saying it, I'm proving it. Then he laid out a 4-pillar reform plan. 1. Retrain all frontline staff with a focus on unconscious bias, equitable service skills, and a culture of respect. 2. Implement transparent monitoring systems, including dual feedback channels from customers and whistleblower staff. 3. Reform hiring and evaluation policies, removing subjective criteria and prioritizing competence, integrity, and service mindset. 4. Restructure the HR department, requiring every complaint to be transparently processed, time-bound, audited, and traceable to accountable individuals. We can no longer define first class by how a passenger looks. Real class is the professionalism that flows from every part of our system. Silence. Then the chairman, known for being hard to impress, spoke. Darius, you have a plan, you have a vision, and more importantly, you have a reason. The board approves, a soft tap of his fountain pen, followed by nods around the table. Darius didn't smile, he just nodded calmly, packing up his materials. The personal battle was over, but the real work changing the system was just beginning. 1 week after the boardroom meeting, Darius Coleman boarded another flight, again first class on Stratus Air, but this time there were no suspicious glances, no hollow smiles, no cold silence. As he stepped into the cabin, everything felt different. The flight attendants greeted him by name, not out of fear, but because they had been retrained to see the person, not just the passenger. The atmosphere wasn't heavy anymore. It was professional, yet respectful. In their eyes, their tone, the way they moved, everything conveyed one clear message. We know who you are not because of your title, but because we understand our responsibility. Before takeoff, a young flight attendant approached and handed him a small envelope. She bowed slightly and said softly, but with sincerity, "Thank you, sir, for holding the line for all of us." Darius opened the note, handwritten, round and neat. "Thank you for upholding the standard. We are proud to serve with honor." He folded the note and tucked it into his jacket pocket. What he felt wasn't victory. It was something deeper, a restoration of trust. A gourmet meal was served, seafood bisque, melt-in-your-mouth beef, the right wine. Everything precise, thoughtful, not because he was Darius Coleman, but because this was now the standard for everyone. No favoritism, no more certain guests prioritized. Just equal professionalism, the kind an airline should have always delivered, but once forgot. As the tray was cleared, the attendant quietly said, "We've read the new policy guidelines. They're clear, strong, and right." Darius looked at her and smiled. This time, the smile was real. He leaned back in his seat, watching clouds slip past the window. This time, nothing weighed on him. He knew the smallest cultural shift can make the biggest difference in human experience. The plane landed gently as the wheels touched down on the runway. Darius Coleman didn't feel triumphant or satisfied, like a man who had just won. What he felt was stillness, the kind only found in those who understand that real change is not a moment, it's a process. He was the first to stand, no rush, no show. Just a man stepping off a plane, knowing something fundamental had shifted because he dared to reset the standard. Two airline executives waited at the jet bridge. One bowed slightly. "Welcome back, Mr. Coleman." Darius gave a quiet nod. No need for words. Praises weren't necessary, and apologies, if any, belonged to the past. He hadn't come for an apology. He came to ensure it wouldn't happen to someone else. Back at Coleman Global the following days brought a flood of emails from Stratus Air Departments. Customer feedback had spiked, not from marketing, but because people could feel the change. An Asian passenger read the now circulating story and sent a thank you note. "You did what so many of us quietly endured." A newly hired flight attendant wrote, "I've never felt more motivated to do my job well, not out of fear, but because this culture makes me want to." Darius read each one, silently, calmly. But his eyes had changed, not the eyes of a CEO managing a crisis, but of a man reshaping values. The Flight 917 incident would eventually fade from public memory, but what it sparked, a complete overhaul in how people were seen, served, and respected, would last far longer, because Darius understood. The true mark of leadership isn't how you're treated, it's how you respond when you're treated unfairly. That night, as he stepped out of his office, Darius looked up at the night sky. Airplanes sparkled overhead lights, blinking in quiet motion. He smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because this time, the plane wasn't just flying. It was carrying a new Standard A legacy. Flight 917 may have landed days ago, but its impact still moves quietly through the way we treat one another, not by skin color status or seat class, but through simple, earned respect. Darius Coleman didn't respond with outrage, he responded with clarity, with conviction. He didn't ask for special treatment, he raised the standard for everyone. This story isn't just about a CEO, a denied meal, or a careless remark. It's a reminder that the biggest changes often begin with the smallest moments. A glance, a decision, a person who chooses not to look away. Corporate culture isn't written in policies. It reveals itself in the moments when no one thinks anyone's watching. Dr. Elaine Winters, human strategy and culture consultant,